Hello and welcome. I'm Leigh-Ann Gerrans and you're watching W News, broadcasting live from the Arabiya headquarters. These are our top stories. Russian President Vladimir Putin says he is not opposed to Slovakia hosting peace talks with Ukraine to end the war, while Kyiv questions their intentions. North Gaza's last hospital is set ablaze after Israeli troops raided it, clearing out staff and patients. The facility had been under siege for weeks. A double impeachment in South Korea after the acting president is also ousted, prolonging the political turmoil and plunging the country's currency. Now to our top story today. As the war in Ukraine nears its third year, Russia's President Vladimir Putin says he's open to peace talks with Ukraine in Slovakia. That's after the country's Prime Minister, Robert Fico, visited the Kremlin this week, offering Slovakia as a venue for negotiations. Putin has repeatedly said Moscow is open to talks to end the conflict.
Slovakian Prime Minister Robert Fico said that if it comes to negotiations, he would be happy to provide his country's venue for such negotiations. We are not against it if it comes to that. Why not? Because Slovakia has a neutral position. From our point of view, this position is neutral and it is an acceptable option for us.
Meanwhile, Robert Fico is one of the few European leaders to maintain ties with the Kremlin despite Western efforts to isolate Russia. Slovakia, which is an EU and NATO member, halted military aid to Ukraine and called for peace talks last year. Fico has accused Kyiv of threatening his country's supply of Russian natural gas, on which it heavily depends. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelinski has repeatedly criticized Slovakia for its friendly tone towards Russia. Zelinski has called Fico's pro-Russian energy policy a major security issue for Europe and has also questioned his motives.
We
are fighting for our lives. Fico is fighting for money, and hardly for money for Slovakia. Shadowy agreements with Putin are either a trade in state interests or work for his own pocket.
On his part, Slovakia's foreign minister says his country is hoping for a peaceful solution to end the conflict. He also said Vladimir Putin's comments on peace talks were a positive signal for the ending of the ongoing war with Ukraine. For some analysts and reaction, I'm joined by Olexy Goncharenko, a Ukrainian member of parliament for the European Solidarity Party, and he joins us now from Odessa. Alexi, thank you so much for joining us this evening. Now, President Putin suggesting Slovakia as a neutral country to host peace talks with Ukraine. What do you make of this choice?
In reality, Slovakia under Prime Minister Fico is not neutral. That's clear because Slovakia has its own interest. A negotiator couldn't have its own interest. That's the story. Also, we all understand with you, with all respect to Slovakia, we need mediators who can influence Russia, who can influence the world stage. Because this is a war where 1 million people involved. And there's not so many countries in the world. It can be United States of America. It can be European Union. With all respect to Slovakia, they can't. And in general, for me, the most important is security guarantees to Ukraine after ending of hostilities, because Putin is not going to end the war. He just wants a ceasefire to refresh, replenish, and to attack again. And this is very important for us, who will give us the security guarantees that Russia will not attack anymore. And it's clear that Slovakia can't do anything about this.
So you say Slovakia can't do anything, but do you think Ukraine should enter into peace talks with Russia in the new year at some point after Donald Trump's inauguration?
Yes, definitely. There is nobody else in the world who wants peace more than Ukraine. We want peace desperately because we are dying every day. So we want it as soon as possible. But we want a real peace, not a ceasefire.
Both sides will have to make some concessions, Ukraine and Russia, as part of these negotiations that will go forward possibly. What do you think those will have to be for both sides, for yourselves in Ukraine and for Putin in Russia, for there to be an end to this killing?
I stand for international law. International law is clear. Russia invaded Ukraine. It occupies our sovereign territory. If we don't want other countries to attack their neighbors in order to change borders or anything like this, we need international law to be restored. So when you're speaking about concessions, I think it shouldn't be international law and international order. It's not for Ukraine, it's for other countries in the world. Will they suffer from the wars like this? Also, I want to remind you that Ukraine is the only state in human history which voluntarily gave up nuclear weaponry 30 years ago under guarantees of the United States and United Kingdom and Russia, which is funny. And what will be the signal to the world, to non-proliferation policy, if after this, part of our territories will be occupied and kept by aggressor? That will mean just one thing. It will be signal to everybody to go nukes because nothing else is promoting security to them.
The Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov also said Russia was willing to improve ties with the US if the incoming administration makes its first move. Are you concerned about the impact this could have on Ukraine? Are you concerned about Trump coming into the White House and what that could mean for the aid that's been sent to Ukraine and the weapons?
We have hopes on Donald Trump. He said he wants to finish the war. He said that he wants, as he said, to drill, to drop the oil prices. So we have hopes that President Trump will be the president who will end this war. Definitely also we have concerns because we don't know exactly what he will do. But in any way, for the moment, President Trump is a hope for many Ukrainians.
Ukrainian Member of Parliament, Alexi Goncharenko, thank you so much for joining me this evening. We appreciate your time. Now, Moscow says it's willing to work with President-elect Donald Trump's incoming government to improve relations with the United States, but only if Washington makes the first move. That's according to Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. Staying with the ongoing war in the shadow of peace talks, Russia and Ukraine appear to be ramping up attacks. According to Ukraine, 6 civilians have been killed following Russia's missile strikes. Over the last 6 months, reports suggest Moscow's drone attacks are increasing dramatically. For more, I'm joined by our reporter in Kyiv, that's Alex Cadyay. Alex, good to see you. Thank you so much for joining us. So we just had the Ukrainian Member of Parliament on today. He was talking about Slovakia possibly holding these peace talks. What's your feeling on the ground in Kyiv?
Well, certainly that news has been welcomed with a degree of skepticism because Slovakia is not seen, since the Fico government came into office, as a friendly nation to Ukraine. Their first move in office was to end all military aid to this country, although by that point Slovakia's military aid to Ukraine was rather limited, and so the prospect of having peace talks in Slovakia seems quite far-fetched to most Ukrainians. They don't see Slovakia as a neutral party, particularly because Robert Fico himself was in Moscow meeting with President Putin just in the last week or so. So certainly some degree of skepticism. They've heard similar proposals from Hungary, from Viktor Orban, the Prime Minister there, also friendly with Russia, very much against the grain of European countries who have not visited with President Putin and who do not want to make negotiations about the future of Ukraine without the Ukrainians' input. So certainly a degree of skepticism, particularly because Slovakia would put itself into quite tricky legal waters if it hosted these so-called peace talks.
Alex, let's just shift gears slightly. And reports today suggesting Russia has been ramping up its strikes on Ukraine over the past 6 months. Now, what impact has this had on fighting and on the country itself? We know their energy systems have been heavily hit.
Yeah, well, there's two aspects here. There's the military aspect. We know that the momentum in this war at the moment is on Russia's side. They continue to advance on the town of Pokrovsk. They continue to advance in other places, and they continue to push back Ukrainian forces in Russia's Kursk region. So on the military front, on the battlefront, that momentum, including these strikes using glide bombs that are very difficult to intercept on the way down, that the momentum is on Russia's side. We know Ukraine is fighting back and is limiting these Russian advances, but certainly it is a difficult time for the Ukrainian armed forces. Now, there's also the national morale perspective, because almost every single day, be it in Kyiv, in Poltava, in Kherson, in other places in Ukraine, you have air alerts. You have Iranian-made Shahed drones flying above, targeting sometimes energy infrastructure, sometimes residential buildings, sometimes military targets. What does that do to the national morale? Well, rolling blackouts. I was speaking to people just in the last couple of days who had their Christmas dinners in the dark. They couldn't cook their food because they didn't have power to do so. So certainly that will chip away at Ukrainian morale. That is the objective, at least as seen by Ukraine. That is Russia's objective. That is certainly what we see on a daily basis in Ukraine, and particularly on the morning of Christmas Day, just a couple of days ago, with more than 70 missiles, more than 100 drones fired at Ukraine in a single night. Nevertheless, and what we hear from Ukrainian leadership is, even though this war is grinding and this war is difficult, they do not want to agree to a ceasefire which could then be ignored in a matter of months by Russia, as they have seen done in the past. So despite the difficulties, Ukraine is steadfast in its desire for security guarantees and a lasting peace.
Yes, that was what Alexi was just saying to us earlier. Alex, a North Korean soldier has been captured earlier today by Ukrainian forces. What do we know about his condition and where he currently is?
Well, we know very little about the details of his capture. He was the first North Korean to be captured. We've also seen reports in Ukrainian media that he has since died from his injuries, his combat injuries. Now, that is really as much as we know. Of course, it is difficult to get a lot of information. This is still a country at war, and so for operational security, the details are slim. But we do have a bigger picture from President Zelinski in the last few days, talking about those North Korean casualties, saying that 3,000 of them have been either killed or wounded in this war. Now, these estimates, again, are very difficult to verify, so you have to take them with a pinch of salt. But even if that 3,000 number is accurate, that would mean that a quarter of the 12,000 North Korean troops that have been sent here have been either killed or injured in this conflict. I've spoken to some on the Ukrainian front line saying that although the North Korean soldiers seem very brave, they lack training, they are not used to this kind of environment in which they are fighting, and so certainly their combat effectiveness is questioned by the Ukrainians. But this individual, the first to be captured since those North Korean troops started fighting Ukrainians, is certainly a symbol of that struggle.
Alex Cadyay, our reporter in Kyiv, thank you for joining us this evening. Let's turn to the Middle East now, where a series of explosions were heard in Gaza last night. This comes as both Israel and Hamas blame each other for stalling ceasefire efforts to end the war. Elsewhere, one of northern Gaza's last functioning hospitals has been stormed by Israeli forces. According to reports, medical staff were given just 15 minutes to move patients to safety. This comes after the director of the Kamal Adwan hospital said around 50 people were killed in Israeli airstrikes targeting the healthcare facility. Israeli airstrikes in Gaza have also targeted journalists. Yesterday, 5 Palestinian journalists were hit outside the Al-Awad hospital. According to reports, they were from Al-Quds Today and died when an airstrike hit their broadcasting van. The Israeli military said it had targeted a group of militants. People living in Gaza are not only enduring the war, but also facing the harsh cold. 3 Palestinian babies have frozen to death from falling temperatures in the past week. A baby girl named Sila froze to death in the Al-Mawazi humanitarian camp, which is meant to be a safe zone for civilians. Thousands of displaced Palestinians are currently living there in makeshift tents as temperatures fall. UNICEF has warned that many displaced children in Gaza have nothing but the clothes they fled in as they escaped Israel's bombardment wearing only summer clothes. Footage from a courtyard in Al-Mawazi shows Sila's small body wrapped in a white blanket with her father holding her.
My baby girl woke up in the middle of the night from the cold. Her mum breastfed her, but by morning, when we tried to feed her again, we found her blue. She had bitten her tongue so hard that she was bleeding from the mouth. Her body was curled up from the cold. Health officials said her heart stopped because of the cold. Look at her tongue. It was bleeding from the bite. She also bled from her nose. We're sleeping on sand and the tent is unlivable.
Joining me now from northern Gaza is Dr. Amjad Elewa, who is an emergency medicine specialist with experience in several hospitals around Gaza. I just want to say thank you so much for your time this evening. Israeli forces raided the Kamal Adwan hospital earlier this morning. What does this mean for the health system in northern Gaza, which is already under severe pressure?
Hello. About Kamal Adwan Hospital, it was trapped for more than 80 days without electricity, water, and any medical supplies. Many of patients who are in ICU department were dead because of no electricity, beside the newborn babies who are in need of oxygen also were dead. Kamal Adwan was the only hospital was working in the north of Gaza in Jabalia, where many crimes happened. So shutting down this hospital, meaning that all injured people in Jabalia will dead. Moreover, Israel attacked the hospital by take all injured people from this hospital with medical staff, and including women and men, for investigation, and many of them was prison. Israel bombed inside Kamal Adwan hospital many times, and many people from both injured people and medical staff were killed there.
Doctor,
Before a few hours, we heard that Kamal Adwan hospital was burned and the fire distributed to the all hospital departments. It's remember us by Al-Shifa hospital crime. It was a horrible crime against humanity. Today, while I was working in Al-Shifa emergency department, I received many cases from Kamal Adwan hospital. And they told us that all medical staff and all injured people evacuated from Kamal Adwan hospital.
Doctor, what are the facilities like where you're working in at the moment? How are you managing to cope? We're obviously seeing reports of a dire humanitarian situation, including babies freezing. How are you coping?
The situation here is very bad and horrible. There is cold, and all the people here, most of them was lived in tents. So many of babies are frozen to death.
What justification has...
What?
No, carry on.
About the health system in Gaza here, it suffers from shortage of medical personnel, as many of medical staff went to south beside heavily bombing in north of Gaza, and a huge number of injured people coming to the hospital where is no enough medical beds or medical staff to deal with them. The health situation is horrible and unimaginable at all. And there is a lack of all surgical specialty like neurosurgery, pediatric surgery, urology. So many injured people facing death because there is no doctors here.
What justification was given by Israeli forces before clearing the hospital earlier today? We spoke about you receiving patients from the hospital. What have you heard from the Israeli side?
I don't hear anything about them.
No problem at all. I just wanted to say to you, you know, we've seen a dire humanitarian situation at the moment in northern Gaza. What do you hope for the future? How can you see a way forward?
Right now, the bombing is still continuous heavily in north of Gaza. And daily we have crimes happened by families who are completely removed from the civil registry. In the future, we hope this war stopped and I can see peace in all the Gaza city. We don't like this war. We don't like fighting. We don't need this anymore. We want just peace.
Dr. Amjad Elewa, who is an emergency medicine specialist with experience in several hospitals around Gaza, I appreciate your time. Thank you so much for joining us. Now, South Korea's parliament has voted to impeach acting President Han Duck-soo. This comes less than 2 weeks after suspending President Yoon Suk-yeol's powers over his declaration of martial law. Following today's vote, Han says he will step aside to avoid more political chaos in the country. I'm pleased to say for more on this, I'm joined by the former British ambassador to North Korea. That's John Everard. John, thanks so much for joining me this evening. John, just 2 weeks into the job and, well, he's already out. Why has he been impeached?
Because Yoon Suk-yeol was impeached, as you've just said, on the 14th of December. The process of impeachment in South Korea requires the recommendation of impeachment to go to the Constitutional Court for approval and ratification. But the Constitutional Court, which is supposed to have 9 members, currently only has 6. There are 3 vacancies. So the National Assembly was trying to rush through 3 nominees to fill those seats. And Han Duck-soo, faced with rowing MPs and a lot of dissent between the 2 major parties in South Korea, said no, he, as acting president, was not going to sign off these 3 until the political parties reached a bipartisan agreement on who should fill the vacancies in the Constitutional Court. The opposition immediately flew into a rage, said that Han Duck-soo was subverting the Constitution, that he was siding with former President Yoon Suk-yeol, and they moved to impeach him. Now, under the South Korean Constitution, to impeach a president, you need 2/3 of the votes in the Constitution, in the National Assembly. But to impeach a cabinet minister, you only need a simple majority. The opposition-controlled National Assembly has argued that because Han Duck-soo is only an acting president, they can impeach with a simple majority, which they can command from within their own ranks. They don't need votes from the ruling party. So they've done that, but the ruling party are very unhappy with this. They say that this itself is a breach of the Constitution and have vowed to fight it. It really is quite complicated.
Yes, indeed. It is a little bit complicated, but thank you for outlining that for us. Today's developments, to me and to the rest of our audience, really highlights this ongoing crisis in South Korea's political landscape, which, as you say, is complicated. What's to come next? What can we expect from the country?
Well, I think the next move will happen probably not in the National Assembly, but in the Constitutional Court itself. You see, the Constitutional Court, while the politicians have been arguing, has ruled that although it only has 6 judges sitting at the moment, it can still convene and it can still hear cases. So President Yoon's impeachment trial actually started today. They've fired the starting gun. And the defense team and the prosecution have both put down depositions before the court. Now, a lot depends on what the court does next. Having established the principle that it is allowed to sit even though it doesn't have its full quorum of 9 members, it follows that it can also rule on, firstly, whether the acting president is allowed to appoint the 3 remaining justices who was legal or not. Or a 2/3 majority is a matter for the Constitutional Court. If the Constitutional Court rules that no, the National Assembly exceeds its powers, then Han Duck-soo goes back to being acting president and we have proper governance restored in South Korea. If it doesn't, then governance will be taken over by another acting president, a man called Chae Sang-mok, who's the deputy prime minister, and who, like Han Duck-soo, is one of the great grey men of South Korean politics, a technocrat. He's not a political leader at all, who has said he just wants to try to steady the ship, give South Korea some kind of government while all this is sorted out.
John, I actually just want to switch gears to something that's come out today. So reports suggest Ukraine has captured a wounded North Korean soldier. I guess this is pretty rare. And how valuable to Ukraine and Western powers is this?
It's valuable in that it's very difficult to argue now that North Koreans are not involved in this war. As you know, the Russians and the North Koreans have been at pains to deny this increasingly obvious fact. The captured soldier actually died a few hours after he was captured, died of his wounds. So there won't be any time to interrogate him. But in general, captured North Korean soldiers would be very valuable to the Ukrainians because they can swap them for Ukrainian prisoners of war on the other side. In prisoner swaps, I don't think there's any doubt that to answer too many questions, to South Korea.
John, we appear to be having some technical problems. I'm so sorry for that, but we'd like to thank you, the former British ambassador to North Korea there, John Everard. And a reminder of our top stories today. Russian President Vladimir Putin says he's not opposed to Slovakia hosting peace talks with Ukraine to end the war, while Kyiv questions their intentions. North Gaza's last hospital is set ablaze after Israeli troops raided it, clearing out staff and patients. The facility had been under siege for weeks. A double impeachment in South Korea after the acting president is also ousted, prolonging the political turmoil and plunging the country's currency. And that's all from us on W News. Thanks so much for joining us this evening. Riz Khan is coming up next, and don't miss Tom Burgess-Watson with G&T. Good night and happy Friday.